from the Salvation Army National Headquarters,
This is the Fight for Good podcast.
Hi, everybody, and we want to welcome you to the Fight for Good podcast. This is a very, very special edition, and we are so glad you're taking a few moments to give us a listen today. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley, currently the Editor-in-Chief of National Publications here at National Headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. And sitting to my left is our Editorial Director, Mr. Jeff McDonald. Jeff, how are you today?
Oh, it's so good to be with you again. Thank you. We're looking forward to hearing what you learned on your latest excursion.
It's a very fascinating trip, and I'm excited to talk about it. And to our right, she's working all the knobs and controls over there, is our producer, Elizabeth Hanley. Elizabeth, how are you today?
I am so super swell, stoked to be here.
You know, I don't think you ever have a bad day.
Oh my golly, thank you. I'm stoked. I'm just so excited.
You might have a bad day, but you cover it.
There's always a pop song.
Always a pop song and a dance move.
Always ready to raise the roof.
Everything else.
I love to pump up the party.
Well, we're glad. We're glad.
Thanks.
Somebody pop up the party. Well, we decided to interject a different type of podcast here today that would just kind of focus on one particular issue, and it's not something that we have produced yet in our written publication. We haven't written an article for the War Cry yet, but it was something that I experienced this last week that I felt very moved that we needed to get our listening audience, get their ears around this, and hopefully get their heart moved. And part of it is, I think, Jeff, this is one of the advantages of kind of doing podcasting. It gives us the opportunity to, and a little bit more license to expand where we want to go with some of our ideas. And this is an exact case, wouldn't you think?
There's so much behind stories that we deal with. It's great to be able to have this avenue of expressing more of the depth of the story.
Well, here we are about 3 minutes already into the podcast, and people are going, well, what in the heck are you talking about? Where did you go? You know, that kind of thing. So one of the things that we're wanting to do, as Jeff kind of has alluded to, is to go a little bit beyond the surface on many of the stories that we're dealing with. And it's very well known and very well documented that the Salvation Army is very engaged and has been historically for many, many decades in emergency disaster services across the United States. History has recorded the Salvation Army's efforts in some of these natural catastrophes that have happened. Well, there was this past spring in the central part of the United States, and namely affecting several states and kind of the northern part of the Missouri River and other rivers overflowed their banks and affecting many farmers in the Midwest, in particular in the states of Nebraska and in Iowa. And the Salvation Army's work there was pretty incredible. And the Western Division actually proposed an idea to us that they thought it would be important to tell the story of what's going on after the floods, after most of the water has receded. It hasn't receded all the way at all. After the media spotlight has moved on to another tragedy. And so we talked about this as possibly an idea to explore. You remember when I brought this to the table, what were your thoughts about it?
Well, first, we're so caught up in the immediacy of the news cycle that we forget that there's long-ranging stories that are ongoing that beneath the public's perception, and it's good to bring that to the fore, certainly. But also, there's so many thoughts that this triggers because the Army has such a dedicated staff in all territories for emergency disaster services. They're well trained, they're well equipped, they keep at the ready to respond in the moment, but also to be there after the disaster, the immediate disaster has taken effect. That's one aspect I think of.
Well, I think that kind of summarizes it. And, as a Salvation Army officer, you just go into these things and you just do. You don't give a lot of second thought. You don't overthink it. Obviously, you have to balance yourself, and we have a whole EDS certification training program that we do, and for spiritual care and just the feeding and incident command and et cetera, et cetera. And I've been involved in numerous types of different situations over the years. But my wife and I were invited by the divisional leaders, wonderful people, and we want to give a shout out to them. Majors Greg and Poppy, or Leanne, Thompson, who have been serving there as the leaders of the Western Division, which covers South Dakota, Nebraska, and parts of Iowa, for the last 5 years. And they asked if we would come out, and I was given the opportunity to speak to their major donors the day before we did this interview, and remind the donors of kind of the broader picture of what the Salvation Army is doing, kind of nationally, but in response to these sorts of things. And then the next day, we were invited to visit a farm, a flooded farm, and talk with one of the unheralded heroes of our nation, the farmers out there that make everything happen for us in this country and in the world. They're growing things in their fields out there that are keeping us alive, and we don't even give it a second thought. And so we had the opportunity to visit the farm of David and Beth Lueth, who have been on this farm, Jeff. This farm that they had is been in their family for over 5 generations. And he's the 5th generation person to farm it, and their plan is that their daughter is going to carry on after them. So 6 generations of farmland in the heartland of the America. It's kind of a telling story.
It's beautiful, and you think about how foundational they are to our country and to the values that we uphold and the hard work they do. And I was reading about Jesus' parable of the kingdom of God being a seed, and think about the farmers who live in that world daily, and they can appreciate what it takes to nurture a seed and have it grow, not just physically but spiritually. And I think that bedrock of awareness is really admirable.
Now, the day that we visited them, it's kind of an early October date, but the weather had changed dramatically. The temperatures had dropped. The night before there had been a little bit of snow flurries and rain, and the winds were blowing pretty strong, around 30 miles an hour. With that day when we were on their farm, the wind chill was in the low 20s, if not the teens. Unfortunately, I was in the process of getting a little sick, so you'll hear and my voice isn't quite all the way back, but you'll hear. I was interviewing them, and I don't feel like I was on top of my game, but fortunately I didn't really have to be, because the subject matter and the conversations that we had, just kind of took a course for itself. So we're going to invite you into the Lueth dining room. It was cold outside and windy, yet the home was very cozy and warm. And we have this conversation around the table. So I want to introduce everybody that's sitting around the table. Eventually to my left is Major Donna Miller, who is an angel and who is a local hero to the 4 counties in which she continues to serve flood relief. So we're going to hear from her. Towards the end of the podcast, I asked her some things, and we'll get into that. But she said some really, really valuable things that I think a Salvation Army officer needs to listen. My wife, Lieutenant Colonel Cindy Foley, was there also. Next to her was Beth. She was kind of reluctantly came into the conversation. lovely lady, used to teach drama at the local high school. And then next to Beth was the Thompsons. So we have Poppy and Greg, Majors Thompson. Again, we greatly appreciate them and thank God for their godly leadership in the caring. And then David Lueth, who just has this magnetic personality. He's been interviewed by the 700 Club, and a very lengthy interview that's actually online you can read. And he was informing us that there's their whole story is going to be documented over a course of a year by NBC. And the week after we interviewed, they have a documentary team that's going to mic them up and follow them around on the farm for 3 days, and then they're going to come back in succession and just kind of show the growth. So
sounds like good news.
I thought it was interesting, and I think you'll hear that. So we're going to break this up, and there's a few segments here. So we're going to give a listen to David and everybody's kind of informal conversation. We hope you enjoy.
NBC is going to be here next week, but they've been filming documentary that's going to air in 2021. They're going to actually stay with us for a full year into next season.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they'll be coming back every periodically. I have about 3 days of mic'd and filmed, two people
So
following me.
You have not farmed at all this year.
Not at all.
No.
There's no way.
No.
Is your ground still underwater?
A lot of it is because of the high river. Just unable to get out and do the field work because this is a river bottom, and we get it's like a sponge.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so when that sponge is full, any kind of little rains that you get all pool up, and that's why we have some pumps down on Highway 2 that wants to drain. Of course, our drainage has been affected by the flood, so things aren't draining. And it's been frustrating because right now I just have the ground, really, basically other than 3 bins to repair, I've just had the ground now to repair, and I can say that I have pretty much turned the page on this flood. You know, up to those minor things that you see every year that keep coming up. But yeah, we've made major progress. Major.
And what did you farm here?
Yes. Corn and soybeans. Yes.
One of the things that we're doing at National Publications is that we're trying to tell a backstory on a lot of the disasters, because we know that first responders come in, Red Cross, FEMA, whatever. The media is there initially, and then they're gone. And all over this country, the Salvation Army is, working with individuals like you for months. I just wrote a piece on the horrible brush fires in Paradise that happened this time last year. So this was brought to our attention. I've known Greg and Poppy for a few years here, and they have great passion for the Lord and great passion for the people of in their division, Iowa and. Is it South Dakota?
Yeah, South Dakota and
Nebraska. So from National Publications, we wanted to do a story. And the hard work that you've done.
Oh, yes.
Well, and then one of the things you need to know where my relationship with Fremont County really started is the Sunday after the disaster. We had a community meeting in Sydney, and we were supposed to meet in the elementary school cafeteria.
Oh, boy.
And they figured there'd be at the most 150 people. And the people kept coming. And finally, Mike Carilla said, "Okay, stop.
Who's
no
Mike
more
Carilla?
people." He is he's a emergency disaster.
Okay.
And said, "Stop. We can't get one more person in this room. We're going to have to move the meeting." So we had to move across the street to the gymnasium where they didn't have sound. And so he's trying to talk and no one can hear him. And then the Red Cross person is trying to talk. And he said, "Well, we'll be here for you." And then they said, he said to me, "Well, do you want to say a few words?" And I walk up and said, "I don't need a mic.
No, he just really just...
I'll use my open air voice. And what you need to know is I will be with you till the very end.
Yes.
And I will be here every week checking on you." And then this is the thing they keep saying, they keep kidding me about. I says, "Now, I'm going to give you my phone number, but please do not write it down." But then, literally, I made the promise that anytime that my phone rang 24/7. I would answer that phone.
She's been top notch. I mean,
And
the
I
love,
have.
just that love that we've felt. We were sitting there at the Percival cleanup. Major Donna was sitting there. I just had to explain to her that through all the organizations that we've dealt with, through the federal government, through Red Cross, et cetera, Salvation Army has just top-notched everyone. Just top-notch. Just because of the caring and also the financial, help. But yet, it's that love that you felt. Major Donna was at every dinner and gave us support. We prayed for support every time. And then you get the community together and people are talking about it. It was a healing through the process. So it made a little... And, of course, a lot of us, you have to know, went through this in 2011. So this was not our first rodeo. But we didn't have the help like the Salvation Army that came in at that time. They might have been here, but, boy, they just didn't really rock and roll like our rock star here did. And, I mean, then what? $250 from Menards, gift certificate, one of the first ones kind of just out.
I promised Percival because we did not give out Menard gift cards until they could actually, for anyone, until they could get back in their homes.
Yes.
So we knew early on Percival was not going to be able to get back in their homes for a while. And then thought they were going to get back in and the water came back.
Yes.
The water came back 3 times.
Yes, it did.
And so I made the promise, I'm keeping cards for you. I'm keeping cards for you. It wasn't until August 17th when we had the family picnic that I arrived and said, I've got your Menards.
I have a gift for all of you here. And my son-in-law just, he's a stoic kind of guy, with the military and all that stuff. And he was blown away.
He had just come back. Wow. He had just come home.
Yeah.
And I had 2 Menards gift cards for every family.
Yes.
So that they could get...
And that was $500.
$500.
$39,000, I believe, you passed out that weekend to just our community of 75 families or so. And we've been using that register of who signed up for FEMA.
Yeah.
We try not to let things fill in those gaps. This is kind of the thing.
But they didn't have to they didn't have to sign up for FEMA for those.
No.
So it kind of gives you that first little section there. Kind of gives you this feel of the conversations that were going on, and I thought there's a couple of interesting things there, pertinent things for us to just pause and ponder a little bit, and appreciate your thoughts on this, Jeff. Mm-hmm. But Major Donna kind of articulated, you could hear the pain in her voice in regards to people that were, trapped in a little bit, not physically trapped by the flooding, but trapped because they had properties that one property they were trying to sell, another one they had just bought. So they basically had 2 mortgages. And in that particular little part, I think it's Hamburg, Iowa, the houses, the levee, there was a temporary levee that had been put there. David kind of explained that, and that levee had to be removed. And because that levee was removed, the water came over and it destroyed 73 homes. So you have somebody that comes to the Salvation Army's doorstep, and they have 2 mortgages, and they can't live in either one of the places because they're destroyed. I mean, what do you do with that?
Yeah, exactly. The people there, they don't want, farmers, of course, are independent and they pride themselves on their independence, their community mindedness. So for them to come to the Army in the first place could not be easy for them. At the same time, what can you do but have compassion for that situation and see how to remedy it?
Well, and I think it's important to know that the government is able to give assistance, only up to a certain point. Of course, because we don't want to make the government collapse on this kind of stuff. But I think it's important for our listeners and our readers to always be aware of the human condition, that people are dealing with, and also we on the Salvation Army are trying to help with with that condition. We can't pay those 2 mortgages for that individual, but maybe there's something that we can do that's very, very small but very significant. And that was kind of like one of my takeaways from that.
Interesting, too, how the idea of hope is so important in those kind of dire situations, and you can do to encourage people to look forward and to kind of revamp their expectations and their plans along the way, while realizing that there is a God who still cares for us, I think certainly helps to some degree.
Well, we're going to listen to another segment here where David talks about his faith and talks about the faith of the Salvation Army and the love that was expressed. So let's give a listen. The community is Percival?
Percival. And so the new kind of tagline that we're using is Percival perseveres.
Yes. And we do.
Now, was this the town that you fed for a couple of months?
No, that's Hamburg.
That's Hamburg, okay.
One family that I worked with, that I cried with, were in the process of selling their one house, had just bought a new house, a couple blocks over, lost both houses. That will never be able to be lived in. They just were awarded grant money a week ago, $6.5 million to build that new levee that now can stay, and the money to tear down 73 homes that will be bulldozed that will never now be able to be built back.
No, it'll all be a green space because of the FEMA buyout is what it is. And so you can't build back on those properties. So that's all going to be just a little wasteland back in there.
I know this just doesn't involve you, but do you know if did they get a fair market value for their property at all?
No.
Just get that? Because I
Little
know
bit.
FEMA has a cap of like
Little
$35,000
stipend.
per family.
And does that mean those mortgages go away?
No, you still have to pay the mortgage.
Right.
So here that one family still has 2 mortgages.
Yeah, it's it broke a lot of people's back. This one did. It people are fed up. I mean, down in South.
People thought 2011 was as bad as it would get.
Well, yeah, it'll never happen again.
Right.
This is one in a lifetime.
It didn't happen again. It happened worse.
Yeah.
It did.
2011 didn't
It
happen.
did because we had, quote, the weather effect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That you
that
have
polar
to.
vortex.
They came in at that, and I had to compare that to one of the floods that they talk about here. It's called the 52 flood. That Percival was flooded. We had a little house. It was flooded over there, and this house was an island at the time. But that came in March, like this one did, because it was a big total thaw out with with still frost in the ground. Everything had to rush out.
Yeah.
So to me, that was real similar. So there you go. Had to do the math. It's about 57 years in a stretch. I can accept that as a farmer. There's your 50-year floods that may come.
Yeah.
Okay, we understand that being on a river bottom.
52 left in April, though.
Yeah, it left in April, and
Yeah,
they planted half a crop. See, when
So
This is
they
hanging out.
established some kind of crop.
Yes.
yes, we were why we chose this business, Beth and I, to continue this on. In the business aspect, I kept looking at all the records, and they had never lost a total crop. At the worst was half a crop in the worst years, and that was those floods. So I figured at least half to be able to budget by and to try to go by.
Right.
It wasn't until 11. Well, lost total crop in 11. It was a beautiful crop. We lost that in June and July, right at the end of June, 1st July. And tasseling corn, just one big, looking for one of the best crops, and boom, it's all wiped out. Okay, that was, didn't harvest that year, but yet we had a beautiful winter. We could get everything repaired for the ground. And that year, I had over 300,000 cubic yards of sand stretched on this 150 acres. And that's 6 foot high mounds of sand. So the core building, the new levee, I worked with them, and they were able to take it off the farm and use it for the levee, which was great. They're kind of doing that now with the other one. But now in this one, I lost a lot of topsoil on this. Left holes in the fields that I can't get into yet because of the high river. I can go out and disc. You can see part of these fields are disc. Well, I just went where it was just too wet. And I couldn't go anymore. I've fixed so many hoses on the disc, tore up disc blades. It's one of the pieces of equipment that's really getting work.
Yeah.
But you'll be out there disking, and it's tall grass and weeds out there. You're going along, all of a sudden there's a spot that isn't, and that's where a hole is.
Yeah.
So we've got government programs to help in farming called the ECP program that helps us. They pay up to 75% of repairs to the ground, and they did that same program in 11. It worked well, but I have to see where I need the repairs first before I get a dozer out there and start working that and filling them in. So this is a process that I'll be going on probably throughout the whole winter now till next spring.
Have farmers stayed or?
Yes.
Yeah.
They have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the elderly, in fact, it was the one that probably broke my heart, a 95-year-old who I talked to said to me, please pray that my home is able to be recovered, because my kids have already told me if I can't go back home, I'm going to a nursing home, and then I might as well die. And so he was fighting to get back in his home. I know of 3 families that relocated to Shenandoah, but their jobs are already there, so they didn't care.
It's an interesting thing about the Midwest. So we did flood work in '97 in Grand Forks when the Red River overflowed. And so everybody was saying, all the experts were saying, well, 10% of your population will move away. And we're like, okay, and they were bracing for that economically and thinking about those things. And it turned out that it was less than 2% of the population that actually moved away. They stayed, they repaired what they had, this is my home, I'm gonna fix this and stay here. And I just think they didn't understand the hardy Midwest attitude that we Midwesterners have.
The perseverance.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, it's hard for Beth and I just to get up and just leave. We are the 5th generation to live and farm this farm.
Sure.
And this is what we chose to do.
Well, and I know that one of the things that's hit the news this week is from the beginning, we have had up to 20 trailers living at Waubonsee State Park.
Yeah.
That the governor has allowed them to live there at no cost.
Yeah.
And at Sydney Golf Course.
Yes.
Well, as of October 8th, they were shutting off all the utilities. Winter is coming. And the problem is no one wants to leave Fremont County. And they cannot make, and of course landowners and renters have hiked their prices sky high.
Yeah.
And they can't make them lower those rates.
That happened all over the area.
Yeah.
That's not indicative of Fremont County.
No.
Yeah.
But
It's
no
everywhere.
one is still willing to leave Fremont County. So instead, people are banding together and making ways so that they can become bigger family units to afford to stay in some of those homes because they don't want to leave Fremont County.
Are you doing any kind of direct service to those families as they merge into one household?
While they were at Waubonsee, I would go out and meet with them, and it was more conversation and take a load of toiletries out to them. They don't want that kind of help.
Yeah.
Very resilient.
Very proud. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And more like, okay, Major, you need to go where people need you.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
You see that they have a need, but
Yeah.
but they don't.
They want to be
it.
self-sufficient.
Yeah.
There's one family in Hamburg, there's 17 in a house right now. 3 different families, and we're living in Wayland. And 17, can you imagine, 17 people? The laundry. I mean,
Yeah, right?
The line
Yes, yeah.
bathroom.
bathroom.
I mean, so,
That's crazy.
I mean,
No,
the meals and everything, so.
So let me ask for all 3 of you. Let me ask, and you can pass on this, and because it's probably a deeply personal question. But how have you worked your way, mentally and emotionally and spiritually through this incredible time of trauma and tragedy?
Well, for me, it's just my faith in God.
No, you do what you have to do. You do what you have to do.
Yeah, my faith. And if you walk out the door, you can see I have a picture of Jesus right outside my door that I look at every day that I leave this house. He's my friend. And to be able to have that is that comfort that gets me through this.
Yeah.
Because then you start to look at the love that comes from like Major Donna and what your organization's been doing is all that reflection of what life is all about. It helps with those. And I did an interview with the 700 Club. Abigail Robertson came down and did a television interview, and that's basically what I said. If I didn't have my faith, this would be so much more difficult to be able to handle, because I do know there is a certain plan for me. And if this is part of it, I guess this is that roller coaster ride. And, on a good roller coaster, when you're done, it's done, it's up and down, kind of scary at times, kind of fun at times. Like, hey, I want to get off a couple of times, during the ride. But when you're done, you go, I'd like to do that again. And that's kind of the way I look at it, that this is my ride right now. And I'm just kind of accepting the fact that this has happened. There's a lot of work ahead of me, which I'm not afraid of the work. Keeps me young, keeps me going, motivated. And the thing of it is, after all of this is done and over with, who knows? It's going to be a much better life. Yeah. Not for me, but for my daughter and my son-in-law who live over at the mobile home over there, which that mobile home we lived in 11 because that was our temporary housing up on the bluff. Bought that and then tore a house down and put it in. And a majority of all the money that I'd received from Salvation Army all went into that home because, yes, this home is protected because this is our house and we had the like FEMA and our insurance, not flood insurance, but we had insurance on the equipment stuff. That was not covered. And being a tenant house, no, it's not covered. So that was total costs. So the wonderful thing with that $5,000 that came to the farmers to pay a bill, paid for the air conditioner unit that got lost over there. Mm-hmm. I lost a well house over here that I needed a whole new well put in. Mm-hmm. So that money helped correspond and fix everything I needed there. Then, boom, here comes another $500 from Menards, and I'm going, well, gosh, I don't have to spend that to build forms because I'm not hiring people to do this. We're doing our own jobs. My daughter and son-in-law and I poured 8.5 yards of concrete and formed it all up. They didn't know they had the skill. And I'm going, yeah, you don't know that because this is what farming is about. Yeah. It challenges you to do a little better than what you can. Yeah. And right now, my friend from Cozad's a brick mason. I was going to try to do it on my own, but boy, it would have taken me till next spring to do what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And we worked up till dark, but he's now over there laying the block for the block skirting.
You told me about that yesterday.
Yeah, so that's the project we're doing on that, and going to be pretty much.
When we're done here, we're all going to go.
We're all going to stay block. But no, that is all because of the Salvation Army. I'm able to do this so quickly. I definitely have a lot more respect for those people ringing that bell, and until you're affected on that, you give, you don't really know where all it's going, and until you're personally affected, and then see what kind of a great organization this is just tremendous. And it's not only the financial aspect of it, it's also the spiritual. That Major Donna brings in and brings the prayers and gives us those prayers of hope. At the end, she had scripture every Thursday that just kind of fitted the needs for the week. Because it was like we could make steps, like, okay, we're gaining 3 days ahead, things are looking good. All of a sudden, boom, you're knocked back, like you said. And okay, the breach wasn't
back
closed.
Back in Babylon.
Yeah, so we still had the battles. We'd move ahead so far, but then we'd be set back two more steps behind on where we were on the next one. So it was a battle up until they got the breach closed. Yeah. And we knew that. We had to get through the breach and get it closed. Yeah. Of course, we couldn't get here.
So they have closed the breach.
The breach is now closed, and now they built it up because of this last weather event. They actually went in there with emergency repairs and built it up to the total height, but it's only sand now. They call that a scab. It's a temporary fix. Yeah. So we don't know what next spring's going to bring. Yeah. That's still up in the air, but yet I don't want to go that far ahead to think, because right now I'm kind of in the moment. And things will develop. And, life still goes on. That's the thing, even though you're having a disaster, you still have a life.
Before we get back to the conversation, let's take a moment to talk about the War Cry. War Cry is a monthly magazine devoted to sharing the love of God without discrimination and representing the Salvation Army's mission of serving human need. Warcry represents the Army's mission through news, commentaries, and stories. Warcry comes directly to your mailbox for only $1 a month. Just visit thewarcry.org to subscribe. Again, that's thewarcry.org.
So, Jeff, I was handed by the Lueths a bunch of pictures of their farm, and we'll be sharing these. I believe we'll try to put this in the January issue of the Warcry as we go forward. But it's amazing to see the amount of water damage and the devastation that just their little farm had, and it's as we were going out there, they talk a little bit about this in the podcast, is that there's farmers there that are never going to get their land back because their land now is part of the river. The river actually has changed. I think it's the Platte River in that area. Forgive me for those of you in Iowa and Nebraska if my geography is wrong. Elizabeth didn't put up the geography map here in her studio. But I was just thinking about that. Just imagine, just one day, and you go to work out your back door. Now you can't work it. I mean, what goes on in the psyche of somebody?
Yeah. Also, when you look at these pictures before us, the extent of their infrastructure, their silos full of grain or whatever their product is, they're looking at an enormous loss. So you have to. During the podcast, I'm hearing in the recording that they're able to have some upbeat to their outlook, some humor in the situation. So, it's certainly a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also it identifies the fact that we are we share so much in common, and when such disasters hit, that's what comes to the fore.
The one thing that I was reminded of that I really hadn't given it much thought, but the water was contaminated.
Oh, yeah.
And there had been sewer plants that had been affected by this. And of course, you have all of these. I'm assuming most of these farms have their own septic systems, and we're looking at a picture that I'm sure we'll put in the Warcry of their granaries, and they had 4 pretty big granaries, and I was able to kind of look inside them, and the thing that they stressed was that there was a current to this flood, so their granaries got rocked off their foundation, and they lost all of the product. I mean, they really couldn't do anything with the product. They were able to salvage it because there's a way that some of the grain can be grinded down and processed so it's clean and it's used to put in a feedlot. But it was more of just to get rid of it so it wouldn't be on their property to rot. I thought that was interesting.
And looking at these pictures, you can see they refer to their house as an island. It truly is an island in water.
Yeah.
How isolated they must have felt.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they were safely, everybody was able to safely pretty much get out of the area because they knew that this was coming. I mean, and when you go online and you read a little bit more about it, and, there's obviously a bigger story here than what we're intending to do. And of course, we're not trying to take any kind of political side on this. I think what our intent here is to show, here's an individual that was a family that was affected by this. This is the continued thing that they're having to struggle with and kind of go on. And this is what the Salvation Army is enduring and persevering for in this 4-county region that Major Donna Miller is responsible for. And their resilience, their perseverance, and as you alluded to, their sense of hope was inspiring for me, personally.
Yeah, I was wondering what you came away with yourself, because granted you weren't feeling all that great during the time, but you persevered through it, and I'm just wondering how what your impressions were.
Well, like I think I alluded to it earlier. I mean, I've always been very respectful and mindful of farming and farmers throughout this country, not only here, but internationally. My wife has this natural inclination to be drawn wherever we travel to see and touch and feel animals, and it's kind of a running joke when we travel with other people. She's a little bit of a Dr. Doolittle. Animals kind of come up to her. Lovely people. My in-laws who have gone to glory many years ago. But my father-in-law, was a hobby farmer. He ran his own business, and then at night would move, pipe and grow. They had animals and things like that. So I've always had that kind of respect. There's just something different, and I think that it's important for people to kind of rub shoulders with our farmers and not to take for granted what people do out of their tilling, God's creation, and they're making this stuff happen. And these individual family farms, face lots and lots of economical challenges, and yet they somehow get back up on their feet and they go. I've rarely met a farmer that didn't have some sense of faith. I think when you're out there working the land, you know that this earth is a lot bigger than some kind of self discussion that you may have about how the world should be or how the world is. I mean, so I walked away from there very inspired, and in fact I think I wrote you like immediately, and Elizabeth, and said we gotta kick this up into the gear. So there's another section here that I'd like for us to hear, and then we'll get back with some concluding thoughts.
Donna, what would you say to Salvation Army officers that are involved in, or maybe down the road involved in long-term care for EDS?
Well, I think for asking the first question first, I've worked with 4 counties through this whole thing. My disaster's been 150 miles long. Have there been frustrations? Absolutely. But when it's come to crisis points, then you bring the Starbucks cookies for your staff. You buy pizza. You remind them that no matter what, remember who we are, who we represent.
I think the disasters that I've been involved in, and there have been more than I care to count, the thing that gets me through, and my people, my staff through, are folks like David and Beth, when we talk about them. We just talked about this in staff meeting, all building staff meeting yesterday at DHQ. And our folks are getting ready to go out and volunteer at toy shops and ring bells and those kinds of things, sign-ups, Christmas sign-ups. And we had people talk about their positive experiences. And I said, okay, now talk about the times that are harder to serve. And when you talk about Mills County, and when you talked about David and Beth, Fremont County, that's what got you through. Am I right?
Yeah.
The harder folks to serve, and they're going through stuff. You're right. And everybody handles stress differently. And I think maybe David and Beth are people, first of all, of faith. Secondly, they're people who probably have other positive attitudes around them. Other can-do people who come alongside them and say, we can make it through this. And maybe the folks in Mills County don't have that. So we never know.
Oh, you're right.
We never know who has who around them, bolstering them, what kind of faith base they have.
Well,
if they believe when you walk out of the house and you say, that's my friend. I have a picture of my friend in my house. And it's Jesus. that makes a world of difference to you every time you go out the door.
Is there anything in conclusion, because I want to spend a little time, go out and see your property, but is there anything else that you...
The answer to your second question.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll hold that question.
Here's my answer to the second question. I've been an officer for 43 years, working on my 44th. My previous experience with disaster is, and only my last 2 appointments have I ever been a Corps officer.
Where have you served majority of your career?
Social services administrator, admin, sick benefit for 20 years, 15 years. So in Peoria, we had the tornado go through Washington County. Hey, Donna, can you put 1,800 meals out of your kitchen? Yeah, sure, no problem. Piece of cake, small kitchen. I can do it, no problem. This time, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, you have 4 counties, and how do I even do this? Get in the car and go. And so my advice to other officers would be, get in the car and go. Let someone else do the work back at the office. Get out there and go. Be the one on the front line. Be the one giving the hugs. Be the one hearing the hurt. Be the one hearing the stories. Because if you're not, you don't have a clue.
It's about relationship.
Be the hands and feet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. So to sum it up, what are some things that you want maybe our listeners and readers to think about and ponder about what's still happening out here?
I think the question that will probably always bother me is a little 5-year-old girl, part of the family that lost both homes, said to me, she's kindergarten, and they were having a horrible time with her acting out. And she living with grandma, so she's safe, everything's good. And she said to me, I just want to go to my house, to my room. I want to play with my toys. And to know she's never going to have her own room with her own toys. Because mom and dad now have 2 mortgages that they're going to have to pay off before they're ever going to be able to start over. And she's 5.
I had never met Major Donna Miller before, and the Thompsons had been sharing a little bit about, all the duties that she did, and I'm always interested in officers' advice. And I think in particular when you have an officer like Major Miller that's nearing the end of her active officership, she retires next summer, I believe. I just wanted to ask that question, what advice would you give to other Salvation Army officers that are involved in these emergency disaster prolonged sort of events? And you heard what she said, just get in the car and go. And I know, Jeff, you've been around the Salvation Army about as long as I have. And you've heard a lot of things, you've recorded a lot of things, you've written a lot of things, you've published a lot of things. What are some of your impressions of what she says there at the end?
Yeah, I think first of all, Salvation Army officers are known for their action and for responding to difficulty, to tragedy, to tough times, and being there for the long haul. I find that the Army is does a lot of self-examination, and I think that's one of its strong suits. It can be a burden sometimes to Salvation Army officers because they tend to be critical, self-critical. At the same time, it keeps them tied to their mission, and I think there's a lot of courage and a lot of guts that it takes to go out there and be present in those situations.
And I like the fact that, she said something about, God's going to provide other people to do the stuff back in the office, all the minutia. And the ministry of the work is important, right? We can't, you're not like just playing that off, but it gets back to the ministry of presence. It's being available, and you can hear it in David's voice. He's saying, I'm a recipient of this sense of self-sacrifice, that the Salvation Army officer is a conduit. She's not asking for recognition. She's not asking for money. She's not asking for fame. She's just doing her job. And the donor entrusts the Salvation Army because of that sort of mentality and that sort of testimony.
Yeah, and I know that what is behind that ability to respond that way is a dedication to the mission to be the hands and feet of God, of God's love.
That's why I was excited to, take the Thompsons up on their invitation and come out and walk the swampy farmland of the Lueths on a very, very cold fall morning. Of course, I scamper back to my other duties, but I've been in those situations where you do day in and day out ministry. A lot of times things go unnoticed, unrecognized, and almost on a sense of not being appreciated, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it comes down to the fact that God calls all of us to complete the mission. We put our hand to the plow and we just kind of move forward. And these opportunities arise when we least expect it. I know that's been the case in my situation. People have died in my ministry at inconvenient moments, or the earth shakes at not at a scheduled time, and you just kind of have to go to it. But I think at the start of my editorship here at Publications, I just want our readers and listeners to know that we're paying attention to the detail of the story behind the story. We allude to that in the November issue of the War Cry, which we will in our next podcast we'll highlight. But the people of Paradise, California, who over 24,000 people were affected in these fires a year ago, that the perseverance of Salvation Army volunteers and employees and officers who were doing this incredible work for 9 months. These sorts of things inspire me, and these sorts of things make me want to keep telling their story, because they're too busy to tell their story in that regards. And I think you're kind of in cohorts with me on this concept.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the fact that the work is hard, very often very difficult, and as you said, it's unrewarding. And I know that one of the mantras that the Army officers follow is, they do it even when it's inconvenient, especially when it is inconvenient, because it often is.
Yeah, it's these disasters are never timely. And they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop, and it's not necessarily just because of climate change or whatever. It's just how life is.
Yeah, and I guess, Colonel, what is the reward for officers in those situations?
Well, personally for me, I think the reward. I always think about it during the Christmas season is just, some people enjoy the Christmas season, some people don't. I happen to be one of those persons that I didn't really, enjoy working 8 straight weeks, right? And, begging for spare change from the community. But there's something happened on the evening of Christmas Eve when you sit down and you go, you know what? We're bringing joy to one person. It makes it all worth it, and Jesus talks about, going after the one. Don't focus on the 99. They're going to be taken care of. Go after the one. I think there's a sense of deep contentment, especially when you're in the center of God's will, and knowing that this is a divine call. I couldn't do this work without that sense of divine, not obligation or duty, but that urge and that compassion and compelled. You're being compelled to it. So I think the Salvation Army officer that's in tune with God's will and the heart of God, the reward that you pull out of that is this deep sense of contentment and almost delight, knowing that we're being the hands and feet of Jesus in this particular opportunity. We were a part of that. we made somebody's life, we were able to change somebody's life forever because of our persistence and because of the sacrifice that we had to make. And then what we do as an officer is we finish that up and we move on. We move on. We take care of our souls, we take care of our bodies, and we await the next opportunity. And I think that's what the Lord wants us to do. And I think it's important for the Salvation Army at a national level. All across in the United States, all Salvation Army officers need to keep their call at the forefront of what they do. We do this not for self-glory. We don't do it for Instagram selfies and for name recognition. We do this for the Lord Jesus Christ, and that we're here to help God's people. So that's a long answer. I'm never one to really think about rewards. I I figure the reward, kind of like comes. For me, I had the opportunity to meet a beautiful farming couple in a flooded field in Iowa. I had the opportunity to meet a very faithful Salvation Army officer who, towards the end of her career, has been given the opportunity to be a Corps officer, who is given everything that she has physically to go to the lengths of a 150-mile area. I've had the privilege now and I consider them friends, the Thompsons, who are one of many divisional leaders across this country who day in and day out pray for their people, love on their people, are doing all that they can to harness the resources that are out there in the communities to help folks and to bring people to a knowledge of Christ through the practical ways that they go about it. To answer your question, it's just you just keep doing it, and the blessings just kind of pour.
That's really inspiring. It encourages us to really, in some small way, and I don't mean this arrogantly, to be aware, to be committed to God's will and what that means for us.
Well, just kind of in closing, when my wife and I were the training leaders out in the West, one of the things that I felt God had laid on my heart very strongly was to make sure that we were equipping Salvation Army officers when they left the doors of the training college to be ready for these sorts of disasters. And that we made sure that people got the right certifications. And I know many of the new lieutenants and younger officers were involved in disaster relief. And I know in the West, in particular, earthquakes and fires are just at the ready. Officers need to be. So I feel good about that, and I feel that we want to continue to be committed. We're not turning our magazine completely into an EDS journal or anything like that, but we want to encourage our listeners and our readers that we're going to keep telling the story. We know that there's going to be something else, and maybe you could tell us your story too. Maybe you could drop a note on our webpage, thewarcry.org. Tell us how the Salvation Army has helped you in your time of need, whether it was a major disaster, it could have been a house fire, it could have been during a shooting, or it could have just been the fact that your family had a tough time making ends meet, and how that food box, kind of kept you alive. I think we downplay a lot of the types of stuff that we do, but Jesus reminds us to keep doing it and to be faithful in what it is that we're doing.
Very good. Yeah. So of course the Army needs support in its efforts, and we certainly appreciate that. We also appreciate prayer for those officers out there who are, seeing the tough side of life very often and responding to it with the love of God. So we ask for prayer, and we ask for support for these folks, and we just ask that God continues to bless the Army and all of us in whatever endeavor we're engaged in.
So we're grateful for you giving us a few minutes of your listen. We hope that this podcast caught your attention, and we hope that you sensed a great appreciation from a recipient of a Salvation Army donation, and the dedication of a Salvation Army officer who continues to love people in her community, and the divisional leaders who continue to encourage all of their officers and all of their operations and ministry there in the Western Division to continue to do the most good. Well, with that, I think we're going to conclude this issue of this particular podcast. So in closing, I am Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley.
I am Jeff McDonald.
And we are the Fight for Good podcast, and we're glad you listened to us. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless you.
Subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to podcasts.